talk about risk management. We'll discuss key points of risk management today. Now, people talk about risk management a lot, but how to implement risk management in an organization? That's a key question people have in their mind. Today, we are going to discuss how risk management could be implemented in an organization. We'll use simple steps to understand how risk management could be implemented. These steps are: number one, establish the context of the organization, identify risks, assess and analyze risks, develop risk management strategies, implement control and response plans, monitor and review, and last, foster a risk aware culture. So, we'll go in details of each and every of these steps. We need to establish the context first, the context of the organization. What are the goals of the organization? What are the objectives of the organization? Objectives of the business. Define the scope. Identify areas, projects, or functions that need to be covered in the risk management. You need to identify the area first and set the risk criteria. Risk criteria means defining the acceptable levels of risk based on the organization's profile. We'll discuss more. Risk criteria is establishing the boundaries, the standards and benchmarks that organizations use to evaluate and prioritize risk. The key components of risk criteria is: what are the acceptable risk levels? How much risk you can accept? What is the risk appetite? What are the likelihood and impact thresholds? How much is the likelihood of that particular risk, and what is the impact it could bring? Then what are the legal and regulatory requirements here? What are the stakeholders' concerns about risk? In how much time the risk need to be mitigated, and what are the measurement metrics of the risk? Okay, so we need to determine the acceptable risk levels and risk criteria, and one measure of determining that is the risk appetite. It refers to the amount and type of risk the organization is willing to accept in the pursuit of its objectives. So we need to determine how much risk the organization is generally willing to accept. The risk appetite is generally tied to organization's mission, vision, and objectives. When we are implementing a mitigation against a risk, we need to do a cost-benefit analysis. We need to compare the cost of the mitigation against the benefit or the risk reduction it is going to bring on the table for the business. We also need to be compliant with the legal and regulatory standards. We have an obligation to ensure that the risk levels comply with the laws and standards. We also need to be aware about the stakeholders say about the risk, and we need to also be aligned with stakeholders perspective while accepting the risk. Now, how to identify the risks to an organization? Many a times we are aware of the risks that are there in the environment based on the type of business that we are doing, based on the location, based on the environmental factors, operational factors. But if we are not aware of those risks, we can use certain methods to identify those risks. One of them is brainstorming, the second is SWOT analysis, and third is maintaining risk registers. Identify both external and internal risk, including operational, strategic, financial, and compliance risk. SWOT analysis is a planning tool that is used to evaluate organizations' internal external factors that could impact its objectives. So it generally involves creating 4 quadrants with one quadrant mentioning all the strengths that the company and business has, then weaknesses, then opportunities and threats. So write down all the strengths that that you have in your business, and we'll take an example of that. So in this example, we have mentioned all the strengths, like we are an established brand, we have a monopoly, there's no one better than us, we have a strong distribution, skilled team. Then we have weaknesses, like we have limited R&D budget, the lack of market data, and high production costs. These are the opportunities, like there is growing demand, untapped demographics, partnerships available, and threats is there is intense competition, changing regulations, economic downturn risk. This is just an example of determining the objective of an example, like launching a new product line. So this way you can evaluate an organization's strengths, weakness, opportunities and threats, and you can establish a better perspective of context of the organization, and you can identify risks in an organization. So maintaining a risk register often brings many benefits on the table. It helps in documentation of the risk, all the risks. It helps in improving risk visibility. Then you can prioritize those risks, and then you can also do risk management with the help of risk registers. A typical risk register will include the following information: description of risk, likelihood about how often is the possibility of risk to materialize in an annual basis, the impact if the risk is materialized, what would be the impact, risk owner, who is the individual or team responsible for monitoring, managing the risk response, what's the planned actions and strategies to mitigate the risk, contingency plan is the backup plan or alternative course of action if the risk occurs, the status and priority. Here is a sample risk register, and as you can see here, the date when risk is documented with its description, likelihood, impact, severity, the owner, the mitigation action, contingency plan, progress on action and status are defined in each column. This is a good template for risk register. The next step is how to assess and analyze risk. Risk is generally defined as a product of likelihood and impact. So we need to evaluate both the likelihood and impact of each risk. The techniques that are used, first one is the qualitative analysis, in which we classify each and every risk into low, medium and high. The second one is quantitative analysis, where you give a numerical scoring or even a dollar value to a particular risk, and this way we develop a risk matrix to prioritize them and take action on them. Here is the sample of risk assessment matrix using qualitative analysis, where we classify the risk based on 5 classifications: low, medium, medium high and high, and we classify them with colors like dark green, light green, yellow, amber and red. Here is the example of quantitative analysis. So we give a numerical value to the high priority, then medium priority and low priority. We can even give a dollar value in place of a numerical value here. There are 4 ways to deal with risks. You can remember a keyword called ATMA, where A stands for avoid, T for transfer, M for mitigate and A for accept. So we should try to avoid the risks that are very high frequency and high impact, and some of these risks may be transferred to an insurance agency, for an example, or we can outsource some of the operations so that we don't carry that risk. Some of them we have to deal with and we have to mitigate them. And if all the three is not possible, finally, whatever is left, we have to either uh, take action like avoid, transfer, mitigate, or finally we have to accept the risk because our business is in a certain way that we have to accept that particular risk. The risk, there has to be a residual risk always. The risk can never be zero. We'll always have some risk and the new ones will keep emerging, but our objective is always to keep the residual risk to at minimum. Then you need to implement those controls and response plans. You need to monitor and review the risk on a regular basis and foster a client aware culture. Each and every department should be risk aware in the organization. They need to understand, they need to think from the risk point of view, and we need to have that culture in the organization. So today we discussed all the steps that are needed to implement risk management in an organization. I hope this was a valuable presentation for you. It brought some information. It was informational, and I'm thankful to you for watching.